Begin tonight with the death of Dolly Parton at the age of 80, one of the most unifying forces in American public life.
Dolly Parton spent her final days doing something that had defined almost her entire life. She kept working. At 80, while dealing with serious health problems, she was still talking about projects, music, and things she wanted to achieve. Then, on August 25, 2026, the news came that no fan was prepared to hear. Dolly Parton was gone. Almost immediately, attention turned toward her final words. But there is a problem with the story. There is no verified public record showing that a nurse revealed a secret bedside statement from Dolly. What the records do show is something quieter, and perhaps more revealing. Just days before her death, Dolly was still speaking about the future. And when those final words are placed beside everything she had endured, they begin to sound very different. Dolly Parton was not simply a singer who became famous. She was a woman who spent nearly 7 decades turning pain into something useful. And in the last days of her life, that pattern did not disappear. It became clearer. For days before her death, Dolly spoke openly about her health. She told people that she had been dealing with health issues. She also admitted that some of those problems had roots in a period when she was caring for her husband, Carl Dean. Carl had died in March 2025 after nearly 60 years of marriage. That loss mattered, not just because Dolly had lost the man she had shared most of her adult life with, but because she later admitted that while caring for him, she had not paid enough attention to herself. That sentence reveals something about Dolly that the rhinestones, awards, theme parks, movie roles, and millions of records never could. She had spent her life taking care of things. Her family, her fans, her businesses, her causes, her music, and the people she loved. But somewhere along the way, she had allowed her own needs to move down the list. That is where the story really begins. Because Dolly Parton's final chapter was not simply about illness. It was about what happens when a person who has spent a lifetime carrying other people finally has to confront the weight of her own life. And the timing is difficult to ignore. In the months before her death, Dolly had already faced a series of health setbacks. She had postponed her Las Vegas residency. Later, she canceled the shows altogether. She missed events because doctors told her to rest. She spoke about dehydration and dizziness. She was recovering from medical problems that had taken a physical toll. Yet even then, she did something familiar. She reassured people. She joked. She kept working. That habit had served her well for decades. Dolly understood how to make people feel safe. Even when circumstances were difficult, she could turn a serious moment into something warm. But there is a difference between being optimistic and being untouched by fear. Dolly had experienced serious health problems before. She had spoken about difficult medical periods earlier in her life. She understood what it meant for the body to suddenly become unreliable. And she also understood something many people learn much later in life. The body does not always follow the schedule of the mind. The mind says, there is still work to do. The body sometimes says, not today. Dolly kept choosing the first voice, even when the second was becoming harder to ignore. That conflict became one of the most important parts of her final year. She was not simply fighting illness. She was fighting the idea that illness should decide what came next. That distinction matters, because when people look back at a famous person's final days, there is a temptation to search for signs. Was the person saying goodbye? Did they know? Were they hiding something? Did they have a final message? Those questions are natural, but they can also distort reality. Sometimes a person who is sick does not spend every moment thinking about death. Sometimes they are thinking about tomorrow. Dolly appeared to be doing exactly that. She still had projects. She still had music. She still had plans. She was involved in the development of a museum celebrating her life in Nashville. She had discussed new business ideas. She was working on creative projects. Her team was even developing early ideas for avatar performances. And in her final interview, she spoke about having many things she still wanted to achieve. That sentence is difficult to hear now. At the time, it sounded like Dolly being Dolly. After her death, it sounds like something else. Sounds like a window into the way she thought. She did not seem interested in measuring life by the amount of time remaining. She measured it by what could still be created. That may have been one of her greatest strengths. It may also have been one of her greatest burdens. Because a person who always sees another mountain to climb can have a hard time admitting when the climb has become too steep. And Dolly had spent a lifetime climbing. She came from a large, poor family in Tennessee. She did not begin with wealth. She did not begin with influence. She began with songs. Songs became a way out. Then songs became a career. The career became a business. The business became a legacy. And the legacy became something much larger than one person. By the end of her life, Dolly had written thousands of songs, built Dollywood into a major attraction, acted in major films, earned Grammy Awards, supported literacy, helped fund vaccine research, and created opportunities for people in the region where she grew up. She had become almost impossible to separate from the idea of productivity. That is why her health struggles carried such psychological weight. For Dolly, stopping was never just stopping. It meant stepping away from the machine she had spent decades building. And she was not ready to do that. Not completely. Not even near the end. There is another part of this story that makes her final year more painful. Carl Dean died first. For almost 60 years, he was the private figure behind one of the most famous women in the world. Dolly was public. Carl was not. She performed under bright lights. He avoided them. She became one of the most recognizable faces in America. He preferred a quiet life away from cameras. Their marriage survived a level of fame that destroys many relationships. Then he was gone. Dolly had spent time caring for him while his health declined. And later, she acknowledged that she had neglected her own health during that period. That is not a small confession. It says something about how grief can begin before the funeral. Caregiving can consume time, can change sleep, can change eating, can change attention, and it can make a person's own problems seem less urgent. There is always another appointment, another phone call, another meal, another thing that needs to be handled. Then suddenly the person being cared for is gone, and the caregiver is left alone with everything they postponed. That may have been part of what Dolly faced. Not simply grief, but the delayed cost of years spent putting someone else first. So here is the question that sits quietly underneath her story. If someone you love needs you, how long should you put your own health second? Was Dolly's decision an act of love? Or did that sacrifice eventually become too costly? There is no simple answer. And there is no fair reason to judge a woman for caring for her husband. But the question matters because it is not really about Dolly. It is about millions of people who do the same thing without cameras watching. They take care of parents, spouses, children, friends. They tell themselves they will rest later. They will see a doctor later. They will deal with their own pain later. Dolly's story simply gives that private struggle a famous face. And there was another force pushing her forward. Faith. Dolly had spoken throughout her life about her belief in God. Her faith was not a side note. It was woven into the way she understood her work, her family, her struggles, and her future. People close to her have described how strongly that belief shaped her outlook during her health problems. She continued to speak with hope. She continued to talk about work. She continued to believe there was more ahead. That faith helps explain something that otherwise seems almost impossible. How could someone facing serious health problems continue behaving as though tomorrow was still waiting for her? Because for Dolly, hope was not necessarily a prediction. It was a choice. She could not control how much time remained, but she could control what she did with the time she had. That is a very different kind of courage. It does not require pretending that everything is fine. It requires moving forward while knowing that everything may not be fine. And that is exactly what Dolly appeared to do. Even after she canceled her Las Vegas shows, she continued working. Even after health concerns forced her to miss public appearances, she continued discussing new projects. Even when people became worried about her, she tried to reassure them. She even joked about the way social media magnified every health story. That humor mattered. It was part of her armor. For decades, Dolly had understood that fame creates a strange distance between a person and the public. Millions of people feel that they know a celebrity, but they only know what the celebrity can show. Dolly showed warmth. She showed humor. She showed confidence. She showed resilience. The private pain was harder to see. And perhaps that is why her final interview matters so much. Because the interview was not given as a farewell. It was not framed as a final confession. Dolly was talking about her health while also talking about her future. That combination tells us more than a dramatic final quote ever could. She was still healing, and she was still working. Those ideas existed beside each other, not one replacing the other. That was Dolly's final rhythm. Pain, then work, loss, then creation, fear, then faith. The world often wants these things separated. Dolly did not. She carried them together. And that brings the story to the most important documented moment near the end. On August 19, 2026, Dolly was honored with the Academy of Country Music's Poets Award. She did not attend the ceremony in person. Instead, she sent a pre-recorded message. At first, it seemed like a normal acceptance speech. Thank the organization. Thank the fans. Accept the honor. Move on. But listen to what she chose to focus on. Not fame, not money, not awards, not even acting. She focused on songwriting. She explained that songwriting had always been the most important part of who she was creatively. She described songwriting as therapy, as release, as joy, as a gift from God. Those words matter now because they reveal what Dolly believed her real identity was. Not the hair, not the clothes, not Dollywood, not the movies. Not even the celebrity, the songs, the words, the stories, the things she could create alone in a room and then hand to another person. That was the part of herself she believed would last. And if you enjoy stories about the quieter side of famous lives, the pieces that rarely make the headlines, subscribe. There are more quietly iconic stories worth looking at, especially the moments that become meaningful only after the cameras are gone. Because Dolly's final message was not really about death. It was about purpose. She was receiving an award for something she had spent decades doing. And she used the moment to explain why that work mattered. That may be more revealing than any supposed secret sentence. The public often wants a celebrity's final words to contain some great revelation. A confession, a warning, a message to the world. But real life is usually less dramatic. People often talk about ordinary things near the end. Family, work, food, memories, tomorrow. Dolly's documented final messages were much like that. She talked about her health. She talked about work. She talked about things she still wanted to accomplish. She talked about songwriting. She talked about gratitude. And she talked about faith. There was no verified nurse statement suddenly revealing a hidden confession. No reliable record has established such a moment. That does not make the story less powerful. It makes the truth more interesting. Because the real mystery is not what Dolly whispered in a hospital room. The real mystery is why she remained so determined to build a future while her own future was becoming shorter. That question leads back to the museum. The music. The unfinished projects. The legacy. Dolly was preparing things that could exist without her. That is what people do when they understand, consciously or not, that their work can outlive them. A songwriter leaves songs. A writer leaves books. A teacher leaves students. A parent leaves habits and memories. A builder leaves buildings. A person does not have to be famous to think about legacy. Dolly simply had a much larger canvas. She had spent years making sure that her work would continue. And now, after her death, that preparation has taken on a different meaning. It is no longer preparation for some distant future. The future has arrived. The songs are still here. The businesses are still here. The books are still here. The people she helped are still here. The places she built are still here. The voice is still here. That is the strange thing about creative people. Their bodies disappear. Their choices remain. Their words remain. Their mistakes remain. Their kindness remains. Their work continues moving through strangers who may never have met them. Dolly understood that long before her final year. She built her career around communication. She took private feelings and turned them into public songs. She took memories of poverty and turned them into stories. She took Appalachian roots and built places where millions could experience pieces of that culture. She took personal success and used it to support causes she cared about. She did not simply become famous. She kept converting fame into something else. That may be the deepest reason her final words matter. Not because they were supposedly secret, but because they were consistent. At the end, she was still talking about the thing that had carried her from a small Tennessee home to the largest stages in the world. Songwriting. Her final public message returned to the beginning. A song, a dream, a story, and then gratitude. That is a strangely complete circle. But it also leaves one uncomfortable question. What happens when a person spends so much of life taking care of everyone else that they forget their own body has limits? Dolly's story does not give us a clean answer. It gives us a warning. Not a warning about fame. A warning about postponement. Most people will never sell 100 million records. Most people will never build a theme park. Most people will never have millions of strangers know their name. But almost everyone understands postponement. I'll do it later. I'll rest later. I'll call the doctor later. I'll spend time with them later. I'll finish that dream later. Later is one of the most dangerous words in the human language because it feels harmless. Until there is no later. Dolly's final year brings that truth into focus. She had plans. She had projects. She had dreams. She had things she still wanted to achieve. And then time made the decision for her. That does not erase what she accomplished. It makes what she accomplished feel even more human. She was not a machine. She was not endlessly strong. She was not immune to grief. She was not protected from illness. She was a woman who lost someone she loved, neglected parts of herself while caring for him, became seriously ill, and still tried to keep creating. That is not a perfect story. It is a human one. And perhaps that is why so many people connected with her. Dolly never needed to pretend that life was easy. She simply learned how to turn difficulty into something people could hold. A song, a joke, a memory, a place, a gift, a reason to keep going. Her death now changes the meaning of those things. But it does not change their value. And if there is one lesson hidden inside her final days, it may be this. A person does not have to know exactly how much time remains to make the remaining time meaningful. Dolly kept working. She kept believing. She kept creating. She kept planning. Until she could not. And when the end came, the most reliable record does not point towards some sensational secret. It points back to the same woman people had been hearing for decades. A songwriter who believed songs could heal. A caregiver who learned too late that she also needed care. A wife carrying grief after nearly 6 decades of marriage. A believer who continued to speak with hope. And an 80-year-old woman who, only days before her death, was still thinking about what she wanted to achieve. That is the part that changes everything. Not a hidden quote. Not a mysterious nurse. Not a final confession. The deeper revelation is that Dolly Parton's final words were not really separate from the life she had already lived. They were the continuation of it. She was still looking forward, even when there was very little time left to look forward to. And maybe that is why her story feels so painful. Because most people recognize that instinct. The instinct to keep going. To finish one more thing. To help one more person. To write one more song. To believe there will be another morning. Dolly Parton lived that way for nearly 70 years. Her final days did not erase it. They revealed it. And now the question is no longer what Dolly Parton said at the very end. The better question is what she had been saying all along. That a life is not measured only by how long it lasts. It is measured by what it leaves in other people. The songs, the memories, the kindness, the work, the courage, the unfinished dreams, and the people who hear a voice long after the person who owned it is gone. Dolly spent her life preparing her work to survive her. Now it has to, and that leaves one final mystery, because Dolly had already been planning for a future in which her voice could continue without her. She had music, projects, archives, legacy plans, and even early ideas involving digital versions of her performances. So the next question is not about the last thing Dolly said. It is about the things she left behind that she knew she would never personally see completed. What exactly did Dolly Parton prepare for the day when she was no longer here to finish it herself? That story may reveal an entirely different side of the woman the world thought it knew.